In this episode of the 2 for 5 podcast, Drew and Christian discuss why keeping your brand updated is essential in today's market. Enjoy the episode.
All right, welcome back to our 2 for 5 podcast with me and Christian. Today we're going to talk about staying ahead of the game and why keeping your brand updated is essential in today's market. So really, we're just going to go through a couple of case studies that we've talked about and that we both really noticed. And the first one that I personally noticed was Dunkin' dropping Dunkin' Donuts from their name. To me, it was more about they were trying to make themselves an overall brand and not box themselves in. It's kind of a pun. Box themselves into just a donut shop.
Comedian over here.
Yeah. And in the same breath, I feel like they have almost positioned themselves in a new market where, you know, originally they're competing against Krispy Kreme and other probably mom and pop donut shops, especially in Knoxville, just knowing the area that all of these places are. But now I feel like they've really tried to take on Starbucks with their rebrand by just being known as Dunkin'.
Yeah, and I think that rebrand opens up a lot of different business opportunities for them for sure. But they didn't alienate their existing customer. They didn't branch out and rebrand too much where the customers who have supported them the most felt like they were cheated, I guess you could say. But to those customers, I don't think there was much of a difference of a change. I mean, they dropped a word, but to outside businesses and other partnerships, it's a whole new playing field for Dunkin'.
Right. I would agree. I don't feel like they're neglecting their customer base that they already had. They're trying to open themselves up into more people, into more consumers. I think that's a good idea, especially when you're thinking about a rebrand. With a big company like that, it's going to be hard to like differentiate yourself and try to make and present yourself in a different way than people already see you, I think. But I think they've actually done a good job with it because I know I go there and I can eat and get a coffee for cheaper than I could at a Starbucks, and I don't feel like I have to get a donut when I'm there.
And I think you said, I guess last week you said this, but you were talking about Dunkin' and Starbucks and how they're kind of in the same playing field now, and they've left Krispy Kreme behind, and they're not really in that niche area anymore. Do you think they're going to be able to compete with Starbucks?
I think that.
Or do you think they're different? Because, I mean, they have different consumers.
I think they're different enough, and I think it's funny though. Like you'll want to go get coffee with somebody, and they're either a Starbucks person or a Dunkin' person. Like I can go to both, but if I'm picking between the two, and I'm just getting coffee, I'm going to Starbucks. But if I want something to eat, I'm going to Dunkin'. And I think that Dunkin' can compete with them. And I mentioned this when we've had previous conversations that I've lived on both coasts, and Dunkin' dominates the Northeast.
Yeah.
And Starbucks is dominating the Pacific Northwest. So they very much have like their regions that they control. But then once you kind of get into middle America, it's more diverse, I would say, where there's like I have two Starbucks within 2 miles of me, and I have a Dunkin' within a half mile of me.
Yeah.
And
you've lived in both places, so you know. But so obviously there's less people in the West Coast than there are where Dunkin' originates in Massachusetts. Do you think Dunkin' has a stronger audience and fan base, or do you think Starbucks does?
I would say Dunkin' does, because I know the people in the Northeast were like, they use Dunkin' as like a badge of pride.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're Dunkin' people. Like, oh, let's go to Dunkin'. Let's go to Dunkin'. I was like, y'all don't have Starbucks up here? And they're like, no, dude. Like,
you didn't
no
know
shot.
Josh Jakes, did you?
I did not.
Yeah. Big Dunkin' guy.
Was he? So see, like,
he's from New Hampshire. And
that's how Barstool got introduced to me too. Like, I had never heard of Barstool until I went and played summer ball in Massachusetts. And they were like, dude, you got to hear this company that, like, they're Massachusetts guys. They're massholes is what they were calling them. I was like, that doesn't sound interesting to me, but I love Barstool now, like after they introduced me to it. But I think people get really into companies that hone in on like a certain region, and that region, if they love that region, then that region's going to love them back. And I feel like Dunkin' has really,
Yeah.
really done that.
Yeah, I think Dunkin' can definitely cut into Starbucks' audience because
Mm-hmm.
Starbucks has such a good brand recognition that they thrive off of that. But I don't see Starbucks having the same loyal fans as Dunkin' would.
Right.
So that's an
I don't.
opportunity.
I don't feel like they're as prideful as the
Mm-mm.
Dunkin' fans.
No.
But
Is Dunkin' international?
I would think so. That's probably a good Google.
Because I could see Starbucks doing better internationally than Dunkin'.
I could too.
Yeah, 36 countries.
Oh wow, they're the
And what?
market leader. I did not know that.
China, South Korea, India, Indonesia, Thailand. That's where they dominate at.
So the first thing you pull up is their mission, and it's
Mm-hmm.
about them, and it says we have over more than 11,300 Dunkin' restaurants worldwide, and that's over 8,500 restaurants in 41 states. Well, the 9 states that they're not in are going to be like Washington, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, like all
California. Well,
those.
California
Yeah,
probably have it.
Northern California doesn't. I told
Yeah.
you last time, San Francisco was the closest Dunkin' to me, and I was in Seattle, and that's a hell of a commute to get a Dunkin' coffee.
Yeah, probably not Canada because that gets into Tim Hortons territory.
Yeah, Tim Hortons is dominating that space
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
That's kind of like the Dunkin' of Canada too.
I'd agree.
It has that following,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had Tim Hortons. It's fine, but
Yeah,
it has that cult-like following. I mean, I drove up
right.
there and I made a stop to make sure I got Tim Hortons. So
You got to try it, like if you're
yeah,
near one. Like
I've heard so much about it.
have you heard of Dutch Bros yet?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've not tried it yet. There's one in Oak Ridge, which is like 25 minutes from me,
Mm-hmm.
but it's
pretty
closer
good.
to Betsy's. Have you had it?
It's a bagel place, right? Like Dutch Bros,
I think
bagels
so.
and coffee. Yeah,
Yeah.
they had some in Orlando, and
Okay.
it
Pretty
was
good though.
yeah, it was better than the Wheelers. It's probably the closest to like a local business feel than their like to their bagels, and the coffee is good, of course, but it's more like the New York bodega style kind of bagels and stuff.
Right. Interesting.
But
I'll have to try that next time I go see
yeah,
Betsy because it's out close to her. But
who's
on
the
to the
other?
next one.
Yeah,
Good transition. Nike was another one that came to mind for me. I
Mhm.
am a very large Nike guy. I prefer, whether it's Nike, Jordan, any of that stuff, I much prefer Nike over any other brand. And there's always the famous Phil Knight rebranded in 1983 or whatever year it was, and he only paid the girl $35 for the rebrand. But
Mhm.
what I really wanted to talk about was how they went from a shoe company strictly running shoes to when they signed Michael Jordan, that kind of set off obviously their Jordan brand, but it also got them into new things. Like
Mhm.
before they had a couple of sponsors. I can't remember their names, but you read Shoe Dog, so I think you remember.
Yeah, I don't remember the names, but
His name was Steve something.
Steve Prefontaine.
Yes.
Oh
He was
yeah,
like their first athlete.
yeah.
And he was like renowned in the running.
He's the best runner of all time. Well,
Right.
I wouldn't. He's most recognizable probably.
Right. And so I think they went from just a running company to they started with Jordan, and I think like later in like the 80s they kind of started getting into apparel.
Mhm.
And I feel like with Jordan they started to make apparel for him, and that made them more open to making apparel for other athletes and going into like other endeavors rather than just sticking strictly with shoes. And now they've turned into this huge conglomerate where
Yeah.
they sign an outrageous amount of athletes and
non-athletes.
yeah. And I mean, like Kevin Hart and Mark Wahlberg both have Nike deals, and that's insane to me.
I think we talked about it too. Didn't Drake have a shoe or like the shoe thing, they make shoes a lot for specific individuals, but there's certain people who have partnerships with them, and
Yeah,
that
like
is just smart.
they all get custom whatever shoe that they like. They either get it named after them, or
Mm-hmm.
they get a Jordan retro in like a colorway that's named after
Mm-hmm.
them. Like Mark Wahlberg's got those. I think they're fives. They're so ugly. They're all green,
Mm-hmm.
but it has the
Yeah.
Wahlburgers logo on it.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the important point about that too is that once they rebranded, because they were always about running and about runners, and I
mhm.
think that they realized, I'm not in the brain of Phil Knight or the team there, but I think they realized that they wouldn't continue to they'd grow at a slower pace if they kept serving runners, because
Right.
it's just the running community wasn't as big as it was. And then once they branched out and got Jordan, I think they realized the opportunities elsewhere. But once they transitioned from like the running company to like the all-encompassing athlete company, all-encompassing athlete company, they every decision they made from then till now has never really compromised their who they are as a company, because they're not a running company, they're not a baseball company. I don't know what their mission is, but I see Nike as like the enhancer of all athletes,
Hmm.
and I think that's what they even any sport they touch, that's the audience for them. Whereas other companies in the same endeavor, they might lean more lifestyle, or they might lean more towards one sport, or they might lean more towards like Under Armour's a lot. You hear my dog barking?
Yeah, that's fine.
They lean more towards the little rat dog. They lean more towards like Under Armour, I think heavily leans towards America, whereas Nike's
Hmm.
branching out to has branched out to other countries and trying to penetrate, especially in the soccer football arena. Um,
Yeah,
but Adidas has a hold, and Puma has a hold over Europe right now.
yeah, I would agree. And just to make a point with how you're saying Nike, and they are trying to continue to build their like the cohesiveness within their company. They are signing athletes who are constantly pushing the envelope. They're signing like Tiger Woods, Cristiano Ronaldo. They're signing like the biggest names that they can find, because the greatness of those individuals, Serena Williams, are like that is in line with what their company values. And if they can put a Nike logo on them, then they're going to associate greatness with Nike.
Mm-hmm.
And um, you made a good point about the last time we talked with the Tiger commercial of the Nike ball rolling in at the Masters that one
Oh
year.
yeah, I mean, you can't plan moments like that.
Mm-mm.
And there's been a lot of moments for Nike with when their athletes are competing and then they see the Nike logo, but there is no sports moment, I think, greater than whenever Tiger's on, like, I don't know what hole it is, but he chips it in, ball's rolling, 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 and then like right at the last second it stops a little bit and then it just continues rolling into the hole. And right when it rolls in the hole, you see that Nike logo. Oh, it gives me chills thinking about it. But imagine how much money Nike puts into advertising. That moment alone will live throughout history as probably one of the greatest golf shots of all time. And it just so
Mm.
happens that their ball, or the ball Tiger was using, had a Nike swoosh on it.
I would love to see how many golf balls they sold after that happened, because I'm sure it was an astronomical amount.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that they didn't see a bump in sales.
I mean, it's and it would never happen if they didn't branch out with Jordan and then realize
Right.
that there's certain athletes that fit the Nike mold more so than
Mhm.
others. And it's just amazing that amount of free advertising they can have with an athlete who might be controversial, but embraces and encompasses what Nike's values are as a company, and just having him go out there and do his thing, and then that happens. It's free advertising.
Yeah. And that's what one thing I like about Nike is that they're not afraid to try new things. They they've made NFTs for shoes now. Like that's not really a market that
Yeah.
people. Yeah, you haven't seen this,
No.
so it's not like a. I think NFTs are kind of dying. I was really country right then,
Don.
because I saw like Logan Paul bought something for 1.7 million and he sold it for like $300 the other day. I was like, that's unfortunate. But no, like I think the risk they took with signing Jordan has helped them take other risks, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
helps them push their company forward in it. That also helps differentiate them from their competition. Not to say Adidas, Under Armour, and Puma
Mm-hmm.
are not trying to do things like that, but I think Nike has built up this brand awareness that that's kind of what they're about and what they do, and they're able to keep their athletes. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I think Nike usually gets first pick of people unless it's the difference in money is just insanely different.
Yeah.
Like Under Armour's biggest basketball player is Steph Curry, which is a good name, but
Nike
Nike's
had him.
had
Nike had him first.
yeah, and they had Kobe, LeBron. They still have LeBron. They still
Mm-hmm.
have Kobe, obviously, and they still have Jordan. So like, there's your top three, I think,
Do you
and
know the
they're all
story
Nike
about
athletes.
Steph?
Uh-uh.
Quick sidebar. So Steph went in to do his shoe deal, and this was a couple years into the league where he's good and built up his name for himself. And the story goes that they treated him like a normal athlete, not as Steph Curry, and they misspelled his name. It's to Stephen Curry, and then that just it's like put some respect on my name kind of deal. And then Adidas apparently, or Under Armour, went out and just did like this massive thing with him and treated him like a king. And now he's their flagship guy. But Nike missed the opportunity.
Yeah, I feel like I heard something similar. I think Kawhi Leonard, he was kind of in a similar situation. He's with New Balance,
Mm-hmm.
but I think kind of the same thing happened. They like made a logo for him or something along the lines of that, and he didn't like it and he wanted to change it, but they were like, no, this is what we decided on. Like, didn't give him any credit, and he was like, well, I'm not going to sign a deal with y'all then.
Yeah. And
So he did New Balance.
I think that's the Kawhi one. I think that's a good point about Nike sticking to what they believe in, because they really hold all the leverage in that, and they don't need Kawhi Leonard. I mean, it being a great asset, but they're not going to compromise their design choices and what their vision is to appease, a really good basketball player, but they can go out and sign the next big talent today, and have them on board with what they are, and keeping customers recognizing their business as Nike, not Kawhi Leonard.
Right. I also feel like they're putting more priority on signing, since Adidas and Puma have that kind of stronghold on Europe. They're kind of putting an emphasis on foreign athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So I know Luka is Jordan brand. And so I feel like they would really want to push for a guy like that who is probably at least top 10 player in the league and has a bigger global footprint.
Mm-hmm.
I think they would push more for that than they would of Steph Curry or a Kawhi Leonard. Even though those are both good players, I think that Luka is just going to have more of an impact for them as a company as a whole.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. And even on like the international, and kind of backtracking what I said about running not being what Nike's focused on as much, but international as well. We were talking about a documentary called Breaking 2 with the best runner probably ever, long distance wise, Eliud Kipchoge. And they produced a whole documentary in the Nike Sports Lab guys went out there and tried to get this runner to break a 2-minute or 2-hour marathon, which is incredible.
Insane.
And then it's just like they're producing films now and not just doing athlete stuff. They have their Nike Sports Lab, or what it's called, and they have their apps and training apps, and they really know their customer.
I would agree. I think you mentioning that documentary is a good
segue
into our next
so
subject.
I'm very passionate about this because I love movies, and it's not a brand, but it does have like a brand identity, and it is Hollywood. So Hollywood, pre-pandemic, was doing well, obviously, and they had some really good movies coming out, and people were going to see them because you could, and everything was fine and dandy. You could see this shift to the big blockbusters, especially I think with the rise of The Rock and Kevin Hart and the big flagship names putting a lot of money behind these guys and girls, and then making a good movie. But it really was leaning more towards superheroes, superhero movies, and people wanted that. And the multiverse stuff and the extended what's it called? The extended universe, I guess it would be called. And then the pandemic happened, and people weren't going to movies, couldn't go to the
Mm-hmm.
movies, and then it's just slowed. People go see big movies that have big names that want to see in theaters, and you don't see the really artistic stuff anymore. And I think that's really, I think Hollywood has either neglected it or they're not as nimble and they can't move, but they've really kind of lost who they are, and really are relying on this antiquated model.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some companies who are production houses like Disney are leaning into Disney Plus, and they realize that people aren't going to see movies, so they're going to cram a lot of content down your throat. HBO, which has always really not pushed a lot of content, but really creates movies and creates shows that differentiate themselves from everybody else because they can, because it's HBO, and they really put a lot of money into one thing. That's another way. Amazon Prime, as well as buying up IP of different film franchises and books like Tolkien. They bought Lord of the Rings rights to that, and it's like, I think they put like upwards of $3 billion into the whole production of 8 seasons.
Oh gosh.
So they're leaning in heavily on that. And then you have a Netflix, which has existed solely outside of Hollywood for a while, but people are enjoying that kind of viewership. And then really the culture, I always try to think of culture, like what is culture talking about? And kind of ever since Game of Thrones popped on the scene, it's always, and like Walking Dead to a degree and some other shows, but there was never a movement in Hollywood in my lifetime I can remember that there was like a Game of Thrones. And even with like Game of Thrones, and then you get like Peaky Blinders now and some of these other series or some films that are produced by Netflix and other companies, but that's where like the culture is revolving around. That's what people are talking about. They'll
Mm-hmm.
talk for a week about, Glass Onion. Is that what it's called? They'll
I
maybe
think
talk
so.
for a week
Yeah, the
for
new
about
one.
that. But I think Hollywood's missing the opportunity to get culture back on its side. And the actors have the culture, I think, on their side. If a DiCaprio movie comes out, I want to see it because it's DiCaprio. But there aren't that many like Hollywood type actors anymore who
Yeah,
have
I
that
think
attention.
yeah, you could probably count on one hand the actors that you and I would both be interested in going to see. Like
Hmm.
DiCaprio's one, Brad Pitt. I
Hmm.
think you said Meryl Streep last
I think
time.
Meryl Streep would be like yeah, she's definitely one of the last of like I don't know if she's that active anymore. Yeah, she's pretty active. But yeah,
I think so.
definitely Meryl Streep. But
But
other than
there's
that,
a lot of times when I was just trying to think of examples of like what I do. And have you seen Bullet Train with Brad Pitt?
no.
So I saw the preview for it. And I was like, no shot, I'm watching this. I was like, this
Hmm.
looks stupid. I
Hmm.
watched it on Netflix probably about a month ago. I was like, this is sick. Like
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I liked it better than the new Glass Onion movie, but if that means anything to anybody. But um, I do think that if they can kind of find a happy medium, Hollywood, with like a Netflix or a Hulu, where they kind of already do this, where they release movies through Netflix. The first one I can think of is The Interview with
Hmm.
James Franco
Hmm.
and Seth Rogen, and when it got taken down by foreign countries.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why they put it on Netflix. But I still think it did well because it was like Hollywood was able to like reach into a part of consumers that they weren't really like getting. Maybe
Hmm.
like I don't know if people who are
Hmm.
interested in that movie are like going to the movie theater to spend almost $100 to buy popcorn, a movie ticket, and
Hmm.
whatever else.
Hmm.
But I do think like I know Hulu does a little partnership with FX. So
Hmm.
like if something airs on FX the next day it's on Hulu. I think that's something good to where maybe Hollywood could look into doing something like that where a movie comes out and you give somebody like the opening week opportunity to see it and then you can put it on Netflix after
Hmm.
that or something along those lines.
Yeah. I think a podcast that I don't listen to a lot, but I get their content on like TikTok and Instagram is Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think they're called. But they're kind of movie guys that talk about the industry and films and review it and stuff. But I think they were speaking about Hollywood, and they think what Hollywood's going to end up doing is they're going to continue to fund the producing films that are really artistic, but they're really going to lean heavily and try to do like 1 to 2 blockbusters, kind of what they're doing right now per year.
Yeah.
They're going to get the big name and try
hopefully
to
one
get
of the passion projects pops off.
Yeah, because like the passion projects, those come from Netflix and the streaming services. It's just probably cheaper to do that than it is to put them in a ton of theaters around the world. But yeah, the passion products. I mean, I'm trying to think of one that comes to my mind that I would never, or like The Last Kingdom. Vikings. Vikings was produced by History Channel first, and then Netflix Amazon got it. But it's just another scenario of, something to maybe taking a risk on something that might not work, but Game of Thrones helped it out a lot. But then you get good actors who have a decent following, but culture just surrounded it. I mean, that's why do you think, I don't know if you're into fantasy a lot, but there's so many shows about Vikings, fantasy shows, and medieval period shows, and even historically not accurate, but historic dramas like The King with Timothy Chalamet or whatever is that his name?
The names that we mentioned have murdered us today.
Yeah, but the Tim guy. You get stuff like that because Game of Thrones, but they're really leaning into that heavily. Whereas I don't think Hollywood per se is. They're producing just big blockbuster and relying heavily on Marvel and big superhero movies like DC.
I kind of see what you're talking about with. I watch Yellowstone more than I watched Game of Thrones. Where so like not only do they have Yellowstone still going, but they have 2 different spinoffs, potentially 3, I think now. But they're also they've created an entire space for country dramas, Western dramas. I feel like because there's been such an interest in it, and I know from previous conversations about us having boots. The Tecovas site that I use, they've essentially run out of boots because they have advertised that some of the guys on Yellowstone wear their stuff and some of the girls actually. And so they've their inventory sucks right now. And I mean, it can't be easy to manufacture boots that have massively mass produced boots. But I just think that's crazy that shows like Game of Thrones, Yellowstone, I don't know, can't really think of another one off the top of my head at the moment, but they have such an impact on the audience, and they
Ted Lasso.
I love Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso, I think, opened up soccer to a lot of Americans, and just the way they ran commercials during the World Cup too, and then I think they're running an FA Cup, and just they know culture. That it's keeping up with culture and giving the audience kind of what they want, and then pushing the envelope. Because I think the superhero movies have started to saturate, especially the ones that are the end games and the Avengers. Those will always do well, but unless you get, I don't know, it's going to be tough because they've run that ship since 2008, since Iron Man came out. Now there's got to be something swift. Yeah, there's got to be a flip, and I don't think Hollywood's knows the culture well. Whereas Yellowstone, I mean, how many people do we know who are not wannabe farmers, but lean into the Western culture a little bit, and then go Midwest? I mean, that's where they are in the mountains, and so they lean into that culture and tap into that, a resource that I would say hadn't been really touched, especially by Hollywood. They're not appealing to that market, Whereas Yellowstone was like, hey, there's nobody's producing Western dramas anymore. And yeah,
I think it's kind of funny because like it's always been like movies are always number one, and then TV kind of takes the back seat to them. Where right now I think it's kind of flipped just based off of the series aspect of things. Like I think series right now are outrageously more popular than movies are, other than the superhero movies. Or if you get a movie with like The Rock or like The Wolf of Wall Street is obviously for finance bros. Like, but I think TV is kind of overtaken then in a production standpoint and in a following standpoint because they're able to understand those things, and Hollywood just it shouldn't be hard for them to figure out because they're outrageously successful people and there's kind of a blueprint there for them. But no, I completely agree with you. I feel like they need a little bit of a culture change.
I guess that's a good place to cap it off.
I'd agree.
You have anything else to say about it?
I don't think so. I think that we did a good job of summarizing our thoughts there.
Yeah, I would say the last thing is know your audience. Like I always say, build a community and keep up with culture because that's where the money people who have money are going to be spending is what they want to be a part of, not what you want them to be a part of.
Yep, I would agree.
Well, thanks for tuning in. Check us out on social at The Social Bullpen on all the social platforms and head over to our website, socialbullpen.com. And we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the 2 for 5 podcast. For more information about The Social Bullpen, head over to thesocialbullpen.com or follow us on social media. We'll see you in the next episode.